On a Monday morning in the spring of 1918, in a small farming town in the American Midwest, there was a line of wagons outside the blacksmith's shop before the sun was fully up. Inside, the forge was already roaring, the same as it had been every working morning for 40 years. And here is the strange thing about that line. The country was at war with Germany. The town had renamed it sauerkraut, pulled the German books from its shelves, and gone quiet and cold toward anyone with an accent like the blacksmith's. Some of the men in that line had crossed the street to avoid him just the day before. But their plow was broken, and the spring fields would not wait, and there was only one man in 50 miles who could fix it. So there they stood, hats in hand, at the door of the man they called the German. This is the story of a man whose town spent 40 years reminding him he was a foreigner, and 40 years discovering, over and over, that it could not survive without him. We are going to call him Fritz. The name is our own, but his forge was real, and his 40 years, and the country that turned on him overnight, those were real for millions of German Americans in one of the most forgotten chapters of American history. Fritz came over around 1878, a young man from a German village with his father's trade in his hands and little else. He was part of the largest immigrant wave this country ever received, the Germans, who settled the Midwest by the hundreds of thousands, along the lakes and the great rivers, in cities like Milwaukee and St. Louis, and in the 1,000 small farm towns between them. They built churches that prayed in German and schools that taught in it. By 1910, there were over 550 German-language newspapers in America. They were, by every practical measure, Americans. Americans who happened to sing and pray and read the news in the old tongue. Fritz settled in one of those small towns, and he opened a smithy, and within a few years, the town could not remember how it had ever gotten along without him. Because in a small farming town in those days, the blacksmith was not one tradesman among many. He was the cornerstone. Some said the most important man in town. Nearly everything the town ran on was made of iron, and nearly everything made of iron passed sooner or later through his hands. He made and mended the plows and the hoes and the hay knives. He built and repaired the wagon wheels and set their iron tires. He forged the chains, the hinges, the nails, the hooks, and when a kitchen pot wore a hole in it, he mended even that with a washer and a rivet, because in his world, nothing that could be fixed was ever thrown away. Out behind the shop stood what a stranger would have called a scrap pile. It was not a scrap pile. It was a bank. Old wheel bands and broken plowshares waiting to be heated and hammered into their next useful life. And then there were the horses. The whole county moved on horses, and horses need shoes, and shoeing was an art of its own. Every hoof is different. Every shoe was made for the animal that would wear it, shaped hot on the anvil, fitted in a cloud of acrid smoke, and nailed with square nails he had forged himself. It took a blacksmith's arm, a surgeon's precision, and a horseman's patience, and quick feet, because a nervous animal does not care how important you are. He had learned all of it the old way, at his father's anvil in Germany, trading his boyhood labor for the craft the way smiths had done for centuries, pumping the bellows until his arms burned, making his own first tools, watching iron until he could read its readiness by color alone. A trade like that was not taught. It was handed down, palm to palm, like a name. The smithy was more than a workshop. It was one of the warm hearts of the town, a fireplace and a few chairs where farmers waited for their work and traded their news, where the children gathered at the door to watch the sparks fly up like stars. Fritz kept his accounts carefully and carried his neighbors through the bad seasons, taking payment in cash when they had it and in eggs, hay, or promised labor when they did not. He married. He raised children who spoke English without a trace of his accent. He paid his share when the church needed a bell. For 40 years, he was woven into every working day of that town's life. And for 40 years, he was also something else. He was the German. It was said without cruelty mostly, but it was always said. His name came with a footnote. His church stood a little apart. He could be essential, respected, relied upon, liked, and still, in some quiet way that nobody had to explain, not quite one of them. He bore it the way he bore the heat of the forge, patiently and without complaint, and he let his work do the answering. 40 years of iron speaks fairly loudly. Then, in April of 1917, America declared war on Germany, and the country lost its mind about its Germans. What happened next has been almost entirely forgotten, and it deserves to be remembered. Overnight, everything German became suspect. Sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage. Hamburger became Liberty Steak. Even German measles became Liberty Measles. Towns with German names changed them. Berlin, Michigan became Marne, Michigan. Schools dropped their German classes. Libraries were told to pull their German books, and in some places, those books were burned. Orchestras struck the German composers from their programs. Iowa's governor issued a proclamation banning any language but English in public. South Dakota banned German even over the telephone. The government registered nearly 500,000 German-born residents as alien enemies and imprisoned thousands of them. Ordinary people with German names were pressured to buy war bonds to prove a loyalty they had never betrayed. Most of the persecution was this kind: humiliation, suspicion, erasure. But at its worst edge, there was real violence. Men beaten and tarred and feathered, and in Illinois, in April of 1918, a German-born man named Robert Prager was taken by a mob and lynched. The men tried for it, walked free. And here is the bitter truth underneath all of it. Once America entered the war, the vast majority of German Americans stood with America. Their sons put on American uniforms and sailed for France to fight the country their fathers had been born in. Fritz's own boy was one of them. Think about what that spring was like in that house. A father filling his loyalty bond quota to satisfy neighbors who whispered about him, while his son wore the uniform of the United States Army. The town demanded that Fritz prove what his family was already proving in the trenches. In Fritz's town, the fever looked the way it looked almost everywhere. Not a mob, but a coldness. The church he had helped build was pressured into dropping its German services, and old men who had prayed in that language all their lives went silent. Boys chalked words on the smithy door that their fathers pretended not to have taught them. Men he had carried through 3 bad harvests crossed the street rather than tip their hats. And yet, the line of wagons never stopped. Because the war did not stop the seasons. The horses still threw their shoes. The mower blades still had to be mended before haytime. The same neighbors who avoided his eyes at noon came quietly to his door at dusk, work in hand. He fixed it. He always fixed it. He shod their horses and mended their plows and held his tongue and let the iron speak. The war ended in November of 1918, and the fever broke soon after, but not before it had burned German America's public life nearly to the ground. The newspapers, the schools, the language itself. Within a couple of years, most of it was gone, and an entire culture folded itself quietly into silence. The town never apologized to Fritz. Towns rarely do. But when the fever passed, something had settled that no one needed to say out loud. The line at the forge on Monday morning said it. 40 years of iron had outlasted 2 years of fear. The man they had called a foreigner was not a foreigner. He was the cornerstone, and everyone had always known it. The war had only made them ashamed enough to notice. Fritz worked his forge into the new decade, though he could hear the future coming up the road. It sounded like an automobile. The horses that had filled his mornings would thin out year by year, and the trade he had carried across an ocean would fade with them. But that is another story. What matters is this one: a man who is never fully granted belonging, and so he forged it. Year by year, shoe by shoe, mended plow by mended plow, until the town's whole working life had his hammer marks on it. Belonging, for immigrants like Fritz, was never given. It was earned in work a town could not live without. We do not know his real name. There were millions of him, the German Americans who built the Midwest, who endured the fever of those years, and whose story has been so completely forgotten that most Americans never learn it happened at all. So this is for him, the man they called a foreigner for 40 years, whose town could not survive without him, and finally knew it. If his story moved you, then he is not forgotten anymore. Stay with us, and we will keep bringing the forgotten back into the light.